I remember standing up here last year on the Saturday morning of Assembly, and the Assembly had voted to ask us one extra question to which we might then respond. What would be our strategy and plan for implementing the synodical mission strategy that you approved last year? Well, I had never seen it, and we couldn't find a copy of it, and so I didn't answer the question. I feel a little bit better prepared to answer that question this year, though what I have been doing very intentionally for the 10 months that I've been in this office has been to try to get to as many places as I possibly could to establish relationships that I would know congregations and know lay leaders and rostered leaders in our church. I've been trying to get to as many places as I possibly could. A number of people have asked, well, when are you going to share your vision for the Synod? I think the Synod has a pretty strong vision already, namely the mission strategy that you approved last year, which focuses on discipleship, which seems to be really the key to everything, is a particular way of moving from membership models to discipleship models. Just to remind you of that mission statement that was approved last year, there were goals to build partnerships, advocate renewal, spread discipleship, initiate new missions, cultivate courageous leaders. Within that, there are all kinds of strategies that we might use to lift those realities up, including centering our life in worship, prayer, and Scripture, identifying and equipping leaders, supporting the ministries of congregations, reaching out through witness and service to share the gospel of Jesus Christ in a changing world, and serve as a steward of the property and resources of the Synod. But notice that that was the last part of the vision for this Synod. And for now, until I get to know things better, having been from outside the Synod, at least for the 6 previous years, I'm running with that as a pretty basic part of what I believe we ought to be pursuing. I also think that whenever things get to be difficult or uncertain, if you look at history, history really does teach us an awful lot. And in the history of the church, whenever things have become threatening or challenging, the cry has always been ad fontes, back to the source, back to the font, back to what it is that we hold most dear. And so the basic realities of biblical study and spiritual renewal are the key elements. That was always true when I was in Boone and I was working in campus ministry, and we would have a great big group of students and we'd think we were going great guns, and then 2 years later we wouldn't have such a great group of students, and over and over again I think we tried to get too cute, and it seemed to me that every time we did that we realized that what we have uniquely to give that people can't get somewhere else better than what we can deliver to them is spiritual renewal and depth and faith, and that's what we exist to be in the life of the church. I know that this is very old news for many of you, but for some it will be new, and that is that we do have 3 expressions of this church that we in the ELCA recognize and lift up. The congregational expression of the church is the one with which most of you are familiar most of the time. The Synod is an expression of the church that we're about right now. And then there is the church-wide, which is all of the collection of all of the synods and how it is that we can be church stronger together than we are apart. Stephen Bowman will be speaking to you about that later on, so I won't get into that church-wide piece very much. But synods were established largely in this country. They weren't even called synods to begin with. Ministerium of Pennsylvania. They were established to provide clergy for congregations, theological education to train those clergy. In other words, synods, ministeria, they exist for the sake of congregations and how people might be served in word and sacrament and led in discipleship and service in and through those congregations. Really simplistically speaking, I really believe that that is what our job is in the Synod, especially in those 3 expressions of the church. We have the Chicago-based church-wide expression in which we gather that will gather this coming August in the Assembly. We have the North Carolina Synod, and we in the Synod are the conduit, the connection piece between the whole larger church of the ELCA and the congregations. But all of it exists to serve congregations growing deeper in faith. We will continue to be putting a lot of emphasis on some things that we've done very well in North Carolina. The candidacy process. Pastor Beth Kearney has done just a phenomenal job with the candidacy process in North Carolina for many years now, and we're so very grateful for that, Beth. But we're looked at throughout the ELCA as one of the example synods for teaching people how to raise up candidates for ministry. And in fact, Beth was invited to the Lower Susquehanna Synod not so long ago to come up there and teach them how they might raise up more candidates for ministry like we do in North Carolina. We take that very, very seriously. The call process is a huge piece. It's probably the most likely time that most of you are going to be encountering the synodical reality of the church, is when you need a pastor or a rostered leader. We spend an immense amount of time on the call process. Even so, I'm learning that it's extremely complicated. My critique of the call process in the first 3 months was it takes really way too long. Why does it take so long? And then I had 4 or 5 congregations that after we went and did their congregational study, it was 6 or 8 months before they turned their ministry site profile into us. And I realized, whoa, it's not all from our side that it's taking so long. If you get us your ministry site profile, we'll find you a candidate. So we're working on ways to try to streamline the call process as best we can. Conflict management and addressing is also a big piece of what we do. And often if it becomes a really deep and difficult situation, we might then refer that to another agency or consultant or some such as that. But those 3 C's, call process, candidacy, and conflict, seem to be huge. I want to jump and to totally change the subject right now. I want to say just a brief word about the topic of concern of the last decade or so, and that is, where is this church in the whole realm of same-gender relationships and marriage in particular? It depends on who you ask, actually, which is not a real comforting thought, but there's a whole lot of things that have happened since this church on the church-wide level in 2009 made a decision in Minneapolis, I think it was, wasn't it? Where it was said that congregations who choose to do so might offer a blessing for same-gender relationship. And blessing was the word. That document also said the language of marriage in this church is precluded. That's the last official document that we have of the church-wide action on that topic. And since then, culture has sped past us, and about a year ago, the Supreme Court decided that same-gender marriage would be legal. Well, do we bless that in our congregations? What do we do with our statement? That is still evolving in terms of what we as a church have as policy. So for now, I can only tell you how we're pursuing this and interpreting this in the North Carolina Synod for congregations. In the North Carolina Synod, we are still following the assumption that it is for congregations who choose to do so. I would say, if you ask me in your congregation, if you wanted to study this issue and if it's something that you wanted to consider, I think everyone should study this issue, whether you want to consider doing that or not. But in any case, number one, nobody from the Synod is going to expect or force you to do same-gender weddings in your congregation. That's something that you will choose to do. Secondly, I would not bring that to a congregational vote. That does not seem to have gone well in most places that did that, because you end up with winners and losers, and people feel like if they lose the vote, then they have to leave, especially in this polarized culture right now in an election year. I would let the congregational leaders decide, the council make that decision. But that is very much a congregational decision. Now, for those of you who are clergy, and I know that some folks have a beef with this, and they think, well, if it's legal, then I can marry whoever I want to. Absolutely. You are correct legally. You can marry whoever you want to. Let me know how that's working out for you in your church, is what I would want to say to you. I think that with our church not being of one mind on this issue, especially as it applies to clergy and the calling of clergy, it would simply be wisdom and kindness, and I think even faithfulness to consult with your congregation if you're planning to do same-gender weddings, whether it's in your congregation's property or confines or not. So legally, sure, our clergy can now marry whoever they want to. I wouldn't pursue that because we're not talking legally, we're talking theologically, ethically, and so forth. So if you ask us in the Synod office what we're to do about that, we will tell you it's for congregations who choose to do so. Also wanted to say a word about something that I didn't invite or ask for, not a squirrel, something else. When the word came that one of the presidential candidates was coming to Lenoir-Rhyne University and was going to be essentially in our house, one of our agency's institutions, and when I conferred with President Wayne Powell about that, and he explained to me that that's not unusual. We've had a lot of candidates through the years, for many years. Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, 4 years ago, Rick Santorum came. It's an open invitation for major presidential candidates to come to Lenoir-Rhyne and be able to speak in an presidential election year. So that in itself, I definitely understand. I made a decision at that point, I guess in the same way that everybody has to make a decision, and I weighed it extremely carefully, that I was going to invite, first of all, I confess to you that I went on a rant on Facebook to begin with, and I did. I still feel that way. I don't apologize that I feel that way, but I do apologize that I put that on Facebook, on social media, in a way that was attacking of a person, because that's not the way that I think we should do things. But I did think that we should go, and those of us who wanted to go from the life of the church, to say that at least in that particular candidate's brand of pointing fingers, particularly at immigrants, and a lot of hate language, a lot of misogyny, a lot of talking against women and putting women in a really bad place, a lot of what I just feel is extremely discriminatory and just hateful and fear-mongering. I felt a need to respond to that. And so what we did at Lenoir-Rhyne, whether you like this or not, we can perhaps debate at some point, but I invited people in a second social media post to come and join us, and we would not speak against anyone, but we would speak for the gospel. We made signs that said, do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God, because we believe that it is the scripture and the gospel that informs us, regardless of who any candidate might be. Also realizing that, we're not in really sparse company if we might protest against that particular candidate or even protest for the gospel, given that a number of leading evangelicals, even in the country, have distanced themselves from that candidate. Wouldn't have done that if he'd come to Catawba College in Salisbury, where I live. Wouldn't have done that. But he was coming to my house and our house. And at that point in the national stage, to say nothing was implicit endorsement of that candidate. And that I could not abide on a personal level or on the level of North Carolina Synod, as I would understand it to be, that people would say Lenoir-Rhyne University or the North Carolina Synod is endorsing this candidate, or any candidate for that matter. So I made a decision to do that. And of course, a lot of people said, well, you know, Bishop, you shouldn't be mixing politics and religion. Really? Can you think of anybody who doesn't do that? I mean, we even label one of the biggest voting blocs in the country by their religious persuasion. We call them evangelicals, right? You know, the Roman Catholic Church regularly says and instructs their priests to say in a presidential election year, we can't tell you who to vote for, but make sure it's somebody who is against abortion. So, I mean, religion is a system of practices to pursue a particular faith persuasion. Religion is something that, legally speaking, in our Constitution is not to be established. There shall be no establishment of a particular religion that one needs to belong to. But faith and conviction, I think, are something entirely different. It would seem to me virtually all of our political discernments, wherever they may end up, are going to be based in our faith and in our convictions of what are the deep truths and the deep values that we hold. I would argue with you all day about saying that faith and politics don't mix. I think they have to mix all the time. I mean, what else do we have? We'll talk about candidates, but we can't get to the core value stuff about that. No, so I'm not asking you to agree with me, but I did want to speak to you about why I did what I did and why we did what we did at Lenore-Rhine. There are some concerns that I have in the life of the Synod. Wanted to let you know, on the level of our mission support, for those of you who knew that I sent a letter to all the congregations in the Synod in mid-December saying we're way behind in our mission support for this year, and we were. We were over $150,000 behind in our mission support, and we had already cut our budget down to about $2.8 million, and at one point it had been up around $6.2 million, so it's not as if we haven't trimmed, because we've trimmed and trimmed and trimmed. The good news of that mission support piece is you all responded right there around Christmas time and right after Christmas with about $78,000 in extra mission support. The bad news of that is even with that $78,000, by the end of our fiscal year in January, we were still the lowest mission support total that we've had in the modern era of the North Carolina Synod. So that trajectory is very common, almost church-wide among the 65 synods in the ELCA. It is very concerning. I don't need for the North Carolina Synod to have a ton of resources so that we can exist and have a building in Salisbury, but I do feel like you've elected a bishop, whoever that bishop might be, to lift up the ministry of the Synod and to encourage us in the ways that we might be church better together than we are apart. And there comes a certain point when, and I understand that people have their own mission projects and their own international mission trips and their own schools that they help and their own this and that and the other, but there comes a point when we have to ask almost every week in our Synod staff meetings, when are we going to tell people we can't do all the things that we did 10 years ago because we have half the staff that we had? And so it becomes a catch-22, sort of a circular sort of a problem that we have when we don't have the resources. Now, I understand fully that many of you are saying, well, right, yeah, but we're struggling just to pay our pastor or to pay our bills, and we've got our own financial concerns. I get that, and God bless you, and we want to try to help you in all kinds of ways that we can. But we do, at the same time, I would be greatly remiss if I didn't say I'm concerned about this, and what does the Synod look like moving forward if we stay on this trajectory of mission support. If you decide in your congregations that that is the trajectory we want to be on and this is the way to go, then we will certainly live with that and we will adjust to that in the most helpful way that we possibly can. But I do want you to understand that there is a value decision that's being made there, and I don't need to create a synod value for you, but we want to be valuable to you in the life of the synod. We have so many smaller, struggling congregations, and that's part of the issue. The ELCA says we have 193 congregations. Our website says we have 202. The difference is we include synodically authorized worshiping communities, mission starts, and so forth in our number. Of those 202 congregations, at least 108 have fewer than 100 people in worship every week. And at least 61 of those have fewer than 50 people in worship every week. Those congregations are basically in a business model kind of projection not viable by themselves. And so we're having to be very creative in terms of encouraging people to look toward new ways of doing ministry together so that we might help these congregations continue the ministry and the heritage and the legacy that they have. One of the ways that is happening that we can say is very recent is St. Timothy in Conover and Faith Lutheran in Conover, wonderful congregations with strong heritage. Both of them have had some real struggles in the last several years. Both of them have been very concerned about what's going to happen in terms of their numbers, what's going to happen in terms of their financial resources, and they just recently called Pastor Mary Miller-Zarell, each of them, to share her. There's still going to be separate congregations with their separate buildings for now and maybe forever, but that's the kind of situation that we're looking at. Now, the difficulty that we also have seen in that kind of configuration for these smaller congregations, and we would love to talk to area clergy about how we address the issue of smaller, struggling congregations. Part of what we have is a sheet that is called the 8 options that you might consider pursuing, and a number of congregations are doing just that, including adoption by a larger congregation, or sharing a pastor, or merging, yoking. There are lots of different ways we can talk about this. Redevelopment. Closing sometimes is an option for congregations, and the ministry gets paid forward in other ways and in new mission starts. What we see, you can probably anticipate, is a real difficulty. There was another set of congregations recently that we were dealing with, and they had agreed in principle, their councils had agreed that they were ready to share a pastor. One of them was going to worship at 9 o'clock, the other one was going to worship at 11 o'clock. And when it came down to doing it, the congregation that used to be at 11 o'clock said, wait a minute, why do we have to change to 9 o'clock? Why don't they change to 9 o'clock? Well, we're not changing to 9 o'clock. Well, we're not either. And so I asked them together, so are you telling me that you'd rather die by yourself than have a chance together? And they said, yes, that's what we're telling you. Now, that's okay, too, because if you're talking about an individual, hospice ministry is very meaningful. You know, if you say that you want to die, then we'll look after you and hold your hand and take care of you and pray with you in that process, and we'll try to find you a pastor who can do that, and we'll do that with you. But I would like to hope and think that we are a little more creative than that, and a little more trusting of burning squirrels and such, that we might be able to look at other possibilities. And so we'll be continuing to try to encourage. The synod will not make you, cannot make you do any of those things. I've already had somebody say, well, you know, that man from the synod came in and said, we're going to have to combine with somebody else. That man from the synod can't tell you that. So if that's what you heard, you need to revise that. You get to decide that, but we want to encourage and facilitate those discussions. Another problem is the geographic disconnect of the synod, especially by that I mean the eastern part of the state. Quite aware of that. It's always been an issue with the with the historic settling of Lutherans along the Catawba River Valley and the Yadkin River Valley, namely Rowan County and the Hickory area. That's where the Lutherans historically were, and there weren't Lutherans east of Raleigh. I mean, my wife was from eastern North Carolina, and when I met her mother, after I left the room, her mother asked my wife, "Now, Lutheran, is that Christian?" She had no clue, and she honestly had never even heard of that, much less met one. So part of what we're looking at is a couple of things. One, in a longer term, not anything immediate, perhaps a restructuring where at least we would consider, if not actually do, something like deployed synodical staff, so that we've got synodical staff people in different parts of the state on a regular basis. Also, right away, I have a commitment at least every 6 weeks to be in a congregation in a substantial way that is east of Raleigh. And so I've already been in 3, and I have 8 on my calendar. But if you're east of Raleigh, you get priority. And so talk to me. I want to come see you. Just to connect. We just want to connect. So let's see. Another issue of concern, congregations who don't want a woman, a black person, an older person, or anybody who wants more than $30,000 a year. When I say congregations, and I think you all know what I'm talking about here, because, there's the structure of how congregations work, but then there's also the kind of the reality of the power structures. And when we get one of those words, like, we're not taking a woman, Bishop, and I guess I'm glad they tell me, but, I mean, it's disappointing, but they tell me anyway. I am beginning to say, and I think we're going to make it policy, well, if that is in fact your congregation's perspective, then I want your council to vote on that and send me their resolution that they won't do that. And in the Synod e-News, we'll put a little asterisk in the congregation seeking a pastor, and the notation down at the bottom, no women. And I suspect that there are a number of men who would not interview in those congregations that say that they will not accept a woman. I'm surprised by that. I don't know why, but I didn't. That one hit me. I didn't see that one coming, and it's fairly pervasive. I'm not just talking isolated incidents here. We're still living in a lot of ways in a different world, but it's not the council, and it's not the call committee in most places. It's a person in the congregation. It's a bully in the congregation who says, we're not doing this over my dead body. Are we doing this? And for whatever reason, their family name or their financial contribution, they have power. And so we need to move beyond that. A couple of let me say something that I'm really excited about, because I've got to quit here in just a short time. I have a lot of things I'm really excited about. I started with the negative stuff that I'm worried about. The Lilly Endowment National Initiative to Address Economic Challenges Facing Pastoral Leaders. That is such an incredible opportunity for us to, if nothing else, just boost the morale of our clergy and our rostered leaders in this synod, to say that we recognize that there are issues of some of our retired pastors who make obscenely low pension income, and pastors who make incredibly low salaries and who carry tremendous amounts of seminary debt. For us to be able to address that in tangible ways, and to also at the same time address a program to enhance stewardship, to enhance financial management, is just a huge possibility. We're so very grateful for that, and pray that this grant will come through. Wanted to share just a list of some things that we're doing new, because somebody asked me about 3 weeks ago, we need to sit down and talk about some new initiatives we can do now that you've been a bishop for about 10 months, Bishop Tim. And I said, well, I started to make a list. The ambassadors/partners that we have who will be coming out starting with Reformation 2016 and serving through about Reformation 2017, visiting with all pastors, visiting with all congregations to help not just tell the story of the Synod, but to come out and hear the stories of the congregations and what they're doing well and what they're struggling with, and intentionally facilitate sharing of things. Social justice and advocacy ministry that went away in this Synod about 11 years ago, that we've revamped that committee here in the Synod, and it's been active, and it's had a meeting and a retreat. We're excited about that. The companion Synod relationships that have sort of languished for several years for just different reasons, mostly not on our side of things. But with Costa Rica and Papua New Guinea have both been reignited. I went to Costa Rica along with my wife and was able to ordain the first woman in the first Costa Rican woman in the Costa Rican Lutheran Church. And we also have the new bishop of all of Papua New Guinea coming to be with us toward the end of July, beginning of August. He'll also be at Churchwide, so we're making these connections. We're hoping to have a Costa Rica delegation of at least 4 people come to be with us in September of 2017 and be at our big Reformation service with South Carolina and also be at our rostered leaders convocation at Luther Ridge. So a lot of exciting things happening there. The Reformation 500 committee and all the events that have already been happening and are yet to come, but especially the curriculum that has been put together. This is really good stuff. And I'm a bit of a snob when it comes to something like a curriculum, but I've looked at a lot of this. Good stuff. Bishop Eaton has one of the 44 weeks of curriculum that has been written. I even did one or two, and several of you might have done some, but this is good stuff. Dr. Mindy Maycant, Dr. Eric Childers, and several others have been working just a lot on getting this curriculum together. We're really excited about that. And is it available now, Dr. Maycant? Monday. August 1st. August 1st. Sounds good. Have staff changes just to go through really quickly. Kelly, our longtime, I think 19 years, accountant in the Synod office, left at the beginning of May to take a job at a Methodist church in Rock Hill, South Carolina. It gave us the opportunity to design what we're planning to combine what she was doing as an accounting person and what Jerry was doing as a kind of an office administrative oversight job. And Jerry's going to be retiring at the end of July, and we're going to be combining those into one position. A similar thing with Bob Schaffner's retirement from our communications work, so thank you, Bob, for your good work as well, and Jerry for yours. But Catherine Fink is going to be stepping up into a new position that combines her resource center management with the communications piece. She'll be the Director of Communications and Resources, or Resources and Communication. So we're excited about that. Since we were last together, we have a new call process coordinator, and that is Sandra Klein, and she's everywhere on Facebook. She's ubiquitous. There are about 8 of her, and we just haven't figured out yet how she does it. But we're really glad that Sandra is working with us. And lastly, Tammy Jones-West, instead of being called just in her youth capacity, we've changed her job title to Director of Leadership and Discipleship to more accurately reflect our priorities and goals in the Synod and our mission strategy, but also to reflect what she's already been doing for a long time. Not to diminish the incredible work and importance of the youth work she has been doing and will continue to do, but to say also preparing a lot of leaders of all sorts. She's, like I said before, behind all of this. We're putting together a leadership school right now for both clergy and rostered leaders and laity, for all of those. And we're also putting together a renewed emphasis on continuing education. That's coming from the ELCA and from the North Carolina Synod among our rostered leaders, that we need to be lifting up our continuing education. Last word, we're expecting 3 grandbabies on July 27th. And my wife is retiring at the end of next week, and that's my life, and I'm looking forward to it.